Hey everyone, I'm Liz Fairy and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to show you how I made these 3 different sizes of skeleton applique out of crochet. Some things you'll need for this tutorial are a crochet hook. For the largest size applique, I used a size 3.5, and the yarn I used to make that size was Red Heart Super Saver in white. For the second largest size, I used a 1.5mm crochet hook, and I used Aunt Lydia's crochet thread in a size 10. And for the third and smallest size, I used a 1mm hook along with 2 strands of embroidery floss. All 3 of these appliques are made in the exact same way, but to make it easier for you to see what I'm doing, I'll be using the 3.5mm hook and the Red Heart Super Saver thread to show you how to complete this project. You'll also need a pair of scissors, some stitch markers or bobby pins, a yarn needle, and a sewing needle with some matching thread. You can also find the written pattern for this project in my Ravelry store at the link in the description below. Now let's begin the project. I'm going to begin by creating a slip knot. Then I'm going to chain 4 to create the foundation chain, and then chain 3 more to count as the first stitch of the row. Then I'm going to mark that stitch with my bobby pin. And now into the 4th chain from the hook, I'm going to treble crochet. To treble crochet, I'm going to yarn over 2 times, pull up a loop into the 4th chain, pull through 2 of the loops on my hook, pull through 2 more loops on the hook, and pull through the last 2 loops on the hook. Now into the next 2 stitches, I'm going to double crochet. And then into the last chain, I'm going to treble crochet 2 times. Now I'm going to begin the next row. I'm going to chain 1, but this is not going to count as the first stitch of the row. But this is not going to count as the first stitch of the row. I'm going to turn the work, then I'm going to double crochet into the 3rd chain from the hook, and that is going to count as the first stitch. So I'm going to mark that stitch with my bobby pin. And now I'm going to chain 5 to create the first eye. Now I'll single crochet into the next 2 stitches. Then chain 5 to create the next eye. Now into the next stitch, I'm going to yarn over and pull up a loop as though making a double crochet. Then I'm going to pull a loop through 2 of the loops on the hook, but I'm going to leave the stitch open unfinished on the hook. Then into the last stitch of the row, I'm going to pull up a loop as though making a single crochet. And now I'll finish the stitch by pulling a loop through all 3 of the loops on my hook. And here is what we have so far. Now I'm going to chain 1 to count as the first stitch of the next row. Mark that stitch with my bobby pin. Turn the work. Then I'll single crochet 3 times into the first chain 5 space. Next I'll chain 2 to create the nose, and then I'll single crochet 3 times into the next chain 5 space. And then single crochet into the last stitch of the row. And here's what we have so far. Now I'm going to chain 5 to count as the first stitch of the next row. Mark that chain, turn the work, then I'm going to treble crochet 2 times into the chain 2 space. Then chain 5 to count as the last stitch, and slip stitch to the last stitch of the previous row. And here is what we have so far. Now I'm just going to slip stitch all the way around until I get back to the beginning of the row, just to leave a nice clean edge on the applique. I ended up with 26 slip stitches around this part, but it doesn't really matter what your final count is as long as you do a nice clean edge. And to finish the row, I slip stitch to the first stitch of the row, cut off the yarn, and pulled the tail to the back of the work. And here's what we have so far. Now I'm going to set this skull aside for now and make the rest of the body. Next I'm going to create the spine. So I'm going to begin with another slip knot, then I'll chain 15 for the foundation chain. Then I'll chain 1 more to count as the first stitch of the row. And I'll mark that chain with my bobby pin. Now I'm going to chain 2 more to count as the chain in between the stitches. And then I'm going to slip stitch into the 5th chain from the hook. Then I'm going to chain 2 and slip stitch into the next stitch 2 times. So one more time, chain 2, and slip stitch into the next stitch. So here is what we have so far. These are going to be the first 3 segments of the spine on this side of the chain. Next, I'm going to make the sternum. I'm going to chain 2 to count as the first stitch of the sternum. Mark that chain so that I remember where the sternum is. Now into the next 4 chains, I'm going to double crochet, half double crochet, single crochet, and then slip stitch. So double crochet into the next stitch, then half double crochet into the next stitch, single crochet into the next stitch, and then slip stitch into the next stitch. Now this slip stitch is going to count as the last stitch of the sternum, so I'm going to mark that with another bobby pin. So now I know that these are the stitches of the sternum, so I can bear in mind where that is later when I come back to create the rib cage. Now I'm going to create the remaining segments of the spine. So I'm going to chain 2 and slip stitch into the next stitch 7 times. So chain 2, slip stitch into the next chain, and keep chaining 2 and slip stitching until I have 7 segments at the end of the spine after the sternum. Let me just show you what we have so far. There are 3 spine segments at the top, there's the sternum, and now we should have 7 spine segments after the sternum. Now I'm going to chain 2 and slip stitch into the other side of the same chain, and that's going to create a segment at the bottom of the spine, which will be the tail. So chain 2, and slip stitch into the other side of the chain. And now I'm going to repeat that 7 more times onto the other side of the foundation chain until I get to the other side of the sternum. So I'm going to chain 2 and slip stitch 7 times, and I should have 7 segments total at the other side of the spine. So I've finished my 7 segments on this side of the spine. Now this last slip stitch that I just made at the end of the last segment is going to count as the first slip stitch of the sternum on this side. So I'm going to mark that with my bobby pin just to keep in mind where the sternum is on this side. Now I'm going to mirror the stitches that I did on the other side of the sternum. So into the next stitch, single crochet, then half double crochet into the next stitch, double crochet into the next stitch, and now I'm going to chain 2 and slip stitch into the next stitch, but that is going to count as the first stitch of the sternum rather than as a spine segment. So I'm going to chain 2, and the first chain of those stitches I'm going to mark with my bobby pin as the first stitch of the sternum, then I'll slip stitch into the next stitch. And here's what we have so far. Now I'm going to chain 2 and slip stitch 3 more times to finish the spine segments on this side. So chain 2 and slip stitch into the next stitch. And then repeat that 2 more times. And that is the end of the row, so I'm going to cut off my yarn. And then I'll bring the tail to the back of the work. And I'm going to leave the stitch markers in the sternum for now, so that it's easier for me to find where I'm supposed to work the stitches of the rib cage. But here's what we have so far. Next I'm going to make the rib cage. Into the back loop of the chain 2 that counted as a stitch when I was making the sternum, I'm going to pull up a loop into the back loop only. So the first stitch that I put my bobby pin in to mark the stitch. Now for all of the remaining stitches of the row, I'm going to only work into the back loops. So I'm going to pull up a loop into the back loop of that chain, and then chain 3 to count as the first stitch. And then I'll mark that stitch with my bobby pin. So into the back loop of the next stitch, I'm going to treble crochet 1 and then chain 1. So I'm going to yarn over 2 times and pull up a loop into just the back loop of that stitch. And then I'll chain 1. Now I'm going to repeat that into the next 2 stitches. So treble crochet into the back loop of the next stitch, and chain 1. One more time, treble crochet into the back loop of the next stitch, and chain 1. Now I'm going to work into the back loop of the next stitch, which was the slip stitch that I marked as the last stitch of the sternum. Now all into that stitch, I'm going to treble crochet 1, chain 1, double crochet 1, chain 3, and then single crochet 1. So first treble crochet into that stitch, again only into the back loop. Then chain 1. Next double crochet 1 into the same stitch. Chain 3. And then single crochet 1 into the same stitch. Next I'm going to chain 4. Turn the work, and then slip stitch into the chain 3 that I just made. And here I'm going to cut off my yarn, and I was already working on the back of the work, so I'm going to leave my tail on that side. When I'm making the other side of the ribs, though, I will pull the tail to the back of the work. So I'll make the other side of the rib cage in the exact same way, except I'll work on the opposite side of the applique. So I'll be working on the back side here. So because I'm working on the back side, I'm going to be working into the front loops instead of into the back loops, so that the front loops will be left open on the other side. So I'm going to do exactly the same thing, pull up a loop into the front loop of that chain 2 that counted as the first stitch of the sternum, Then I'll repeat exactly the same steps, except I'll work into the front loops. And here is what we have so far. And I'm going to leave my stitch markers in the top of the rib cage so that I know where to work the arms when I make them later. Next, I'll make the hip bone. In between the 6th and 7th spine segment at the bottom of the spine, into the slip stitch, I'll pull up a loop and chain 5. Now into the chain 2 space of the segment at the bottom of the spine, the tail, I'm going to single crochet, next I'll chain 5 and slip stitch to the stitch in between spine segments 6 and 7 into the slip stitch. And here's what we have so far. Now I'm going to chain 2, then turn, and then into the first chain 5 space I'll double crochet 2 times. Now I'll chain 2, and into the same chain 5 space I'm going to single crochet, half double crochet, then double crochet 2, chain 1, and slip stitch, all into the same chain 5 space. Now the first double crochet that I make here, I'm going to work into later when I make the leg, so I'll mark that stitch. So single crochet 1, half double crochet 1, then double crochet 2, and before I continue, I'm going to mark that first double crochet. Then I'll chain 1 and single crochet into the same chain. Next, I'll slip stitch into the single crochet that I made at the middle, and then into the next chain 5 space I'm going to do the same thing mirrored, and I'm going to mark the second double crochet that I make here so that I know where to work when I make the leg. So into that stitch, single crochet 1, chain 1, double crochet 2, and before I continue I'll mark that second double crochet, then half double crochet 1, single crochet 1, chain 2, and then double crochet 2. And now to end the work, I'll chain 2, and then I'll slip stitch into the stitch in between the spine segments. Then cut off the yarn, and I'll sew in the end later. And here's what we have so far. Now I just need to make the arms and legs. Next I'm going to create the arms, starting with the collarbone. I'm going to begin my work into the back loop of the chain 2 that counted as the first stitch of the sternum, which was the same stitch that I worked into when creating the rib cage. So I'll pull up a loop into that stitch, and chain 5. And now I'll work into the top of the chain 3 that counted as the first stitch of the rib cage. So into that stitch, I'm going to yarn over and pull up a loop as though making a double crochet. Then I'm going to pull a loop through 2 of the loops on my hook, but I'm going to leave the stitch open on the hook instead of finishing the stitch. Now I'm going to repeat that into the next 2 stitches. So yarn over, pull up a loop in the next stitch, pull through 2, and then 1 more into the next stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, and pull through 2. Now I'll finish the stitch by pulling a loop through all 4 of the loops on my hook. Now I'm going to make the shoulder, so I'm going to chain 3, and then into the 3rd chain from the hook, I'm going to repeat the same thing I did here. I'm going to yarn over and pull up a loop, as though to make a double crochet. Pull a loop through 2 of the loops on the hook, leaving the stitch open on the hook, and then repeat that 2 more times. Yarn over, pull up a loop, pull through 2, and leave the stitch open on the hook. Then 1 more time, yarn over, pull up a loop, pull through 2, and now pull a loop through all 4 of the loops on my hook to finish the stitch. And now I'll make the arm. I'm going to begin by chaining 14 for the foundation chain. And now I'll chain 1 to count as the first stitch of the hand. Now into the 2nd stitch from the hook, I'm going to double crochet 3 times, single crochet once, and then slip stitch. So double crochet 3 times into the 2nd stitch from the hook. Then single crochet into the same stitch, and then slip stitch into the same stitch. Next, I'm going to chain 5 and skip 5 chains, then I'll skip 5 chains, and into the next 3 stitches I'm going to pull up a loop as though making a single crochet, but leave each loop open on the hook. Then I'll finish the stitch by pulling a loop through all 4 of the loops on my hook. Then I'll single crochet into the remaining 5 chains. Now to end the row, I'm going to slip stitch into the side of the stitch that I made at the shoulder. Then I'll cut off the yarn, and then move the tail to the back of the work. Next, I'll make the fingers. I'm going to make these with the applique front facing away from me, so I'll turn the work around. And then into 4 of the stitches here, I'll create a finger. If you like, you can create 5 fingers, but I feel like it looks a little crowded with 5. But if you prefer that look, then you can go ahead and put 5 fingers. I'm just going to do 4. Now the fingers are pretty simple. I'm just going to pull up a loop into each stitch, chain 4, working around the tail, and then cut off the yarn. So pull up a loop into that stitch. Then working around the tail, I'm going to chain 4. To work the chain around the tail, I'll just chain back and forth on each side of the tail. Then I'll cut off the yarn, and I'll pull on the tails just a little bit to tighten each loop at each end. And that's going to create the finger. So I'm just going to repeat that on 3 more of these stitches. And I'm going to leave these tails for now, and I'll sew them all in at the end. To create the arm on the other side, I'm just going to do the exact same thing, except I'll work on the back of the applique. Next, I'll create the legs. First, I'm going to pull up a loop into the stitch that I marked at the bottom of the hips and chain 4. Now into the 3rd chain from the hook, I'm going to yarn over and pull up a loop as though making a double crochet, pull through 2 of the loops on my hook, and leave the stitch open on the hook. Then I'll repeat that into the same stitch 2 more times. And then finish that stitch by pulling a loop through all 4 of the loops on my hook. Now to create the leg, I'll chain 17 for the foundation chain. Then I'll chain 1 for the first stitch. And now into the 2nd stitch from the hook, I'm going to double crochet 3, single crochet 1, and slip stitch. Next, I'll chain 7 and then skip 7 chains. After skipping 7 chains into the 8th chain, I'm going to pull up a loop as though making a single crochet, then yarn over and pull up a loop as though making a double crochet, and pull through 2, and then I'll pull up another loop as though making a single crochet, all into the same stitch. So first pull up a loop into the 8th stitch, then yarn over and pull up another loop into the same stitch, and pull through 2 of the loops on the hook as though making a double crochet, and then pull up 1 more loop as though making a single crochet into the same stitch. Leave the stitch open on the hook, and now finish the stitch by pulling a loop through all 4 of the loops on the hook. And this is going to create a little kneecap at the center of the leg. Now I'll single crochet into the next 7 chains and skip the last chain. Next, I'm going to slip stitch 2 times along the side of the stitch that I made at the top, Then slip stitch into the first chain that I pulled up at the bottom of the hip, and then slip stitch into the stitch that I started from at the bottom of the hip. Then cut off the yarn and pull the tail to the back of the work. And here's what we have so far. And then I'm just going to use the exact same method that I used to make the fingers to make the toes at the bottom of the leg. With the applique facing away from me, working on the back side of the applique, I'm going to pull up a loop and chain 4 into 4 of the stitches that I made at the foot, working around the tail. And just like when I was making the fingers, I'm going to work my chain back and forth along the tail. Again, you can make 5 toes if you like, but I'm just going to make 4 to keep things from getting overcrowded. Then I'll pull on each tail just a little to tighten the loop at the beginning and end of the toe. And I'll sew in all these tails later. Now I'm just going to repeat the exact same thing to make the leg on the other side, this time working on the back of the applique. Now I've finished the whole thing, and now all I need to do is sew the head to the body and sew in all the tails. So I'll use the tail end at the top of the body to sew on the head. When sewing on the head, make sure that you have all of the slip stitches facing up, and all of the front loops at the sternum also facing up. When sewing on the head, I'm also going to make sure that I'm placing the needle into the head behind the row of slip stitches, so that it maintains that nice clean edge. And once I've sewn on the head, I'm just going to sew in the rest of this end. Now let's deal with all of these tails at the fingers and toes. You could sew them in normally by threading each one onto a yarn needle and sewing them into the stitches. I used this method on the first of these appliques that I made, but I found that it added a lot of bulk, and more often than not it would warp the shape of the fingers and toes. So the faster, easier method that I came up with is to simply sew the tails in along the bottom side of each finger and toe using a regular sewing needle and thread. To do this, I laid the tails along the bottom of each finger and then sewed around the tails along the entire length of the finger with my needle and thread. Once I had sewn the tail down along the length of the finger, I cut off the remaining tail at the base of the finger. Then I sewed a couple more rows around the tails along the length of the finger. When the tails were sufficiently encased, I sewed in the ends of my thread, sewing through the yarn tails to make sure that they stayed in place. Then I cut off the thread and repeated that process on all the fingers and toes. Once I finished encasing all the tails for the fingers and toes, I used my yarn needle to sew in the remaining tails in the normal way. And now all of my skeleton appliques are done. I really love how these little skeletons came out. And I'm so excited to put skeletons on pretty much everything now. The two smaller sizes I think would look really cool incorporated into some lace work. And the largest size would make some pretty decent Halloween decor. Let me know what you would use these appliques for in the comments section down below. If you liked this video, press the like button and share it on social media. You can also follow me or tag me on Instagram at LizFairy to show me what you're working on, or to show me any of my projects that you've tried out. And if you'd really like to help out the channel, you can donate to my Patreon. You can find more information about Patreon at the link in the description below, or by going to patreon.com/fairyrings. Or if you'd like to support the channel in another way, you can leave a super thanks on the video right here on YouTube. You could also subscribe and click the bell icon to receive notifications every time I post a new video. Let me know any other spooky applique ideas that you'd like me to try out in the comments section, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!